Fancy. Hello, listeners. I am here with the very first virtual episode of Unplugged with Taylor. Very excited to be interviewing Morgan Palmer. She is a sex and intimacy coach. Morgan, it was funny earlier. I was trying to figure out this platform and I wanted to record a test snippet, and I did the recording with your introduction by myself, and I watched it and my eyes went to the floor in shame when I said sex and intimacy.
Oh
And I was like, why did I do that? Am I 12? Can I not say sex and intimacy in my own apartment? But I guess that's why people need sex and intimacy coaching, because of all of the stigma that surround it and the shame and all the things that we're going to get into.
no,
So, why
absolutely.
don't you just talk a little bit about that, about what you do?
So what I do is like sex and intimacy coaching. So a lot of it is like removing that shame, like processing through that shame because like the reason, like you said, with feeling like you're 12 years old again is because a lot of our sexual shame comes from a very early age. And we think just because we grow up and we start like having sex that it goes away, but it doesn't really go away. So it's a lot of the work I do is going back to those really painful early childhood memories and processing through that pain with my clients to be able to move through into healthier relationships and sex, which is so gratifying, but also exactly because we all have sex. It's completely natural and normal. We all have desires and needs and urges, and we all have different kinds of relationships. So being able to have good relationships that heal us versus hurt us is so powerful.
Yes, that's beautifully put. How did you get into something like that?
I think it was always a curiosity from a young age. I think, growing up in the church, they say like, oh, like sex is bad until marriage and you shouldn't touch yourself. And it was always a curiosity because from a young age, like a lot of kids, I mean, we all know we have genitals, but we don't really understand what they are. So a lot of like young kids will rub up against things and be like, ooh, what is that sensation? And for me, it was that. It was that kind of early, very young exploration. And so it started off just as a curiosity. And then society comes in, tells us all the things like we're supposed to be, like what a woman's body should look like. And if you're not this exact perfect image, then there's something wrong with you. And if you have desires, then there's something wrong with you. So it really just started off as this curiosity in my own life. And I was thinking, this is so odd. Like, why do I feel such shame about my body? Like, what's going on? Why do I kind of hate my body, but I also have to show up in my body every day? So it was this really big disconnect, and I just started exploring it on my own. I remember when I was a teenager, all the like girls, like all my friends were talking about, like masturbating. And even though I did it, I felt so embarrassed to admit that. And we would go to like Spencer's Gifts and get like the little neon vibrators. And it was like something so natural that I enjoyed so much, but felt was wrong and I couldn't explain it. So it was a journey of starting out self discovery of why, like, what taught me to hate my body and what was the disconnect and how can I connect to my body. And also, like, as I grew up getting into relationships, I was like, well, what is a good relationship? How do you have good relationships? And the reason why I talk about intimacy too, not just sex, is because, like, yes, sex is so important, but intimacy is the building, it's the sexual tension, but it's also vulnerability in all our relationships. So being able to see relationships not just as like, this is my partner and that's the only relationship I have, but my siblings, my family, my friends, like, how can I be a good sister, a good friend, a good daughter, a good partner? Like, how can I be good in all these relationships and be okay feeling vulnerable? Because, we have one body our entire lives. Like, you may as well get used to it, get into it. Otherwise, like, you're stuck inside yourself your whole life, and feeling disconnected can really feel like you're outside of yourself and you're not able to go back in. So it was a huge thing of me of just self-education. And I did have a lot of like really great mentors along the way to teach me about sex and intimacy, and I was always attending workshops and attending classes. So it was a huge self-education. And then I finally decided like I want to teach people this. Like I've been able to do this so much in my own life. How do I help other people? And I think that's a huge thing. Like when you have gifts, being able to share that with other people, and looking around, I would see, well, I'm so connected to my body and I have these great relationships, but other women are complaining to me about their relationships and their sex lives, and not in a way of like how can I capitalize on this, but like this is
How
bigger
can
than
I
us. Yeah.
people? Would you say that it started with your own journey of like healing your relationship with sex and intimacy, and because you put in so much work and had so many tools and had such a knowledge base that you were like, okay, now I want to help other people, that I've been able to see the growth in myself?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I saw like, it can be such a profound journey to go on this self-discovery and realize it for yourself. But then you go through all this discovery and you learn all these things and you think, wow, like I've done so much work on myself. This is so great. But then you look around and other people aren't changed. And you think, wow, like I feel so great. I wish this person felt this great. And instead of them having to go through 10, 20 years of failure and education like me, how can I help them in a way that doesn't, that they won't have to like fail their way to success? Like, how can I use my experiences and what I learned to help other people, to serve other people?
How, going back to what you said about like the shame around sex starts so early, and like natural curiosity or like experimentation, like a person or a child does not know there's anything like bad or shameful about something until someone puts that idea in their head. So what do you see like with clients you've worked with is when that typically starts?
It's usually around like 6 to 10. And a lot of people also experience sexual trauma, like early sexual trauma in this time as well. So part of it is trying to kind of recreate this weird sensation that we're not sure of because we've been, sexually abused and not understanding it and feeling like we can't talk about it, we can't tell anyone what happened, and feeling violated. So it's hard to feel safe and comfortable in our bodies. So that's where like that early shame comes from, especially like if you have a child who's been molested or abused, and the adult that took advantage of them will say like, don't tell anyone this happened. And they'll feel like they have this secret. Or on the other side, the much lighter side, because it's very dark, but completely what a lot of people go through is
Absolutely.
a lot of kids will just kind of experiment with themselves. Like they'll, like rub themselves on like the furniture and be like, oh, this feels good. And a lot of parents are like, no, don't do that. Like that's
Yeah.
weird. Like, and
That's
just
what I was
immediately
thinking
shut them
about.
down.
It's great, like just working in education for a long time, you see a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the general, which obviously school is not the place for personal experimentation,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the general consensus was like, stop, what are you doing? So I just was thinking like, wonder what age is it typically at home? Is it typically at school? Is it typically like, not necessarily experimentation at church that gets corrected, but like teachings at church. I know, like as a growing up in a very, what is a good word for it? Uh, I don't want to use the word traditional. It was a Baptist, Southern Baptist church through and through, like all the stereotypes and like people speaking in tongues, all the things. And my mom was very much into like the rapture and like, so as a little kid, my mom would be like, well, she was always talking about the rapture and like it would sounded terrifying to me. So I had lots of questions. And she was like, well, one of the things, if you want to be with the people that are taken first, you have to like do the right thing and like followed by God, and God's always watching. He sees everything. And then when you die, you have to go and like list off all your sins in front of everyone. So, as a like as a preteen or whatever, like coming into that phase, I always struggled with like, oh my God, but God can see.
Yeah, but
So,
exactly. That's when
and
like
I'm
kids are so impressionable. Huh?
and I'm gonna have to talk about it at the pulpit. So
Mm-hmm.
those are my two biggest like anxieties around like early like sexual experimentation, which I mean puberty usually starts around what, 11?
Yeah, like 11,
Yeah.
12, 13. Some earlier, some later.
Would you say that most of like a majority of the clients that you've had that have came to you seeking support have been victims of sexual abuse of some sort of like sexual trauma early in life or even later in life?
Yes, a lot actually more later in life. And sometimes I've had people also realize through working with me that they had like something happen when they were younger that they completely put down, or people who know something happened, but they're unsure what the details are. But most people I've worked with have had some type of sexual trauma, whether they were taken advantage of or like just didn't speak up for their needs or whatever it was. There's definitely like some type of sexual violation.
I'm just thinking about how much that puts on you, like when it comes to holding space for people and like, kind of how you probably have things in place and resources and what have you when those things come up to kind of direct people like, okay, there's probably some other things you want to explore like with a therapist or with some other, bringing in some other people in to support you with this because that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Like I have some people who are trauma informed who specifically work with like victims of sexual assault. And also it's like working with whatever's coming up for them as well and seeing if it is like too painful to go into to be able to kind of like move away from it if they don't want to talk about it or feel it in their body again, and trying to make sure that like they also feel safe and like comforted and they trust me to be able to express those things and just be completely held in that, because ultimately like my goal is just to help them move through it. So in whatever I need to do in those spaces to be able to make it not so painful that they're forcing themselves to relive something that traumatized them, but that they're able to move through it in whatever speed they need to.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what you just said, mind body connection, because
Mm.
obviously, for a multitude of reasons, some people just are not connected to their body. And so, what does that look like when people are in their head, not connected to their body? What does that look like for them in terms of their sex lives typically?
Usually it's just, I mean, a lot of the times you see sexual problems like women unable to orgasm or men with erectile dysfunction problems because they're not able to connect to that pleasure. And they're so in their head that even though they're physically there, they're completely somewhere else. So they're not really able to relax into it, especially if they are victims of like sexual assault. They'll be constantly questioning this person. But if people are really disconnected from their body and very much in their head, they're not able to really accept a lot of pleasure because they're so stuck in their head and they're not able to connect that with their body.
That's interesting to think about all the people on medication for like erectile dysfunction or different like, things like that when really it's how often is that someone who's just that disconnected from themselves?
Yeah. And there, of course, like I'm no doctor, so like, sometimes people do need like those type of medications, but definitely like there's so many things people can do before actually getting to that point. And like a huge part of it is like actually exploring where those dysfunctions came from and like why they started, and looking at the mental side of it rather than just this is a physical problem and it's just physical. Like it's never just physical. Like it's so mental.
Yes, that's been a really interesting theme in some episodes with like just various topics lately is like the lack of in Western medicine, the lack of connecting mind and body, like the different parts, like the lack of looking at the mental aspect and how it's impacting the physical.
Hmm. And I think part of it is like the society that we're in is very much this like you have no problems, you're not allowed to have problems, you don't have time to have problems. So like here's a pill and like your problems will go away. And like that's all you have to do. Because it's also like pretty terrifying to like, because if you think about it two ways too, if someone says just like, oh, I have like these sexual problems, okay, here's a pill, it'll get rid of it, great. Or if someone says, okay, if you want to fix that, we have to connect with your body, we have to have more mindfulness about the sex that you're having, we have to process past pains, we have to like have intimacy with yourself. It seems on the surface level to be so much more work, but it's lasting too. And that's like having a relationship with yourself because you can kind of dull out on medication or you can actually have a great relationship, especially because, I mean, we're seeing now so many long term effects of medications that have to do with sex, like birth control or like ED medication. If you stop taking it, it can have such adverse effects on you. And like, I feel like we are seeing so many people who are starting to get out of pills and out of medication because they're like, oh, this is just like, because even if you take a pill for it too, you're still disconnected. Like that doesn't really fix the problem.
When you were talking about that, I was also thinking about like women and how many women like have difficulty getting being interested in sex because of that same reason, that mind, that disconnection from their body, or maybe there's past traumas or what have you. And society really sends the message of you you don't get the option to not have sex, especially if you're in a relationship or you're married. Like you need to, I mean, in my age, like the narrative growing up was very much like that's your responsibility when you're in a marriage or a partnership, and there's no excuse not to. Like I know women that will excuse cheating and just basically say like, oh well, they cheated because their partner wasn't having sex with them anymore. Like it's very much like
Oh,
your wifely duty, like responsibility. And so I just think about how many women suffered through in silence and just you aren't enjoying the sexual. Do you see that in a lot of clients, like women that come to you and are like, look, I'm still having sex with my husband or my partner or whatever, but like I don't enjoy it.
yeah. And it's like rewriting this belief too because it comes from like that traditionalized standard of marriage that you as a wife, you are there to like cook, clean, raise the kids, and like have sex with your husband. And exactly like, and it's crazy how many times, like specifically in cheating, when they're like, oh, it's the woman's fault because she didn't like sleep with her husband enough. And it's so wild. It's so wild. But absolutely, people will think, especially like women will think, like there's also that belief that sex keeps a man. So as long as I have sex with him, then he won't cheat on me, then he won't leave me. But what's
There's people
interesting about
actively giving that kind of advice on
yeah.
like social platforms that my little sister and other
There is.
young women are on.
Oh
Like
my
actively, I
god.
saw a video. It had like over 1 million views, and it was a girl that was basically like, "Yeah, and I get this, and I get this, and I get this that I want, and I get all these things in my marriage because I do this, this, and this." And I was like, what kind of transactional marriage are you promoting to young women that they should be like, oh yeah, that's what I want. This is where
Mm.
there's no communication, there's no like partnership. I mean, to me, that's just not partnership, that's the transaction.
Yeah.
And it just really cheapens the idea of what relationships or partnerships or marriages or whatever are, I thought. But I was like, God, what are, why is this the advice that's out there floating around on the internet?
But it is like because we have advanced as a society so much in such a short amount of time, there's still people who are like so consumed by the past. And there's like certain things like if you want a certain type of relationship, you have to have like I love Vivian, um, the rich BFF. She talks about like if you want to have a traditional marriage, like if you want a traditional woman, you have to have traditional money. Like if you want to, if you want a woman to stay home and cook and clean and take care of the kids, then like you need to make enough money to support that. But if you like are both going to your very demanding jobs every day and getting home after a long day of work, you can't expect her to like cook, clean, and do everything else that a traditional woman does because that doesn't coincide in the values.
And those are different types of partnerships. Like, okay, if you're going to handle this, this, and this, I'm going to handle this, this, and this. And that is different from this transaction of, oh, I'm holding up my end of the bargain. Why aren't you? You're not meeting the contract that we have
Mm-hmm.
without this. Okay, what's the issue here? Like, let's work through things together. It becomes this like one person is going to leave because the contract the woman is not having sex with them enough, or not, there's not intimacy anymore, instead of actually like working through it. And I wonder, just thinking about, do people really have the tools? Like, are there a lot of tools out there to work through problems with intimacy in a marriage or in a relationship? Or do people often just cheat or leave because they internalize the other person's actions on some subconscious level and think, oh, it's because they don't want me. That's fine. I'll go find someone else who does.
Yeah, it's totally like because a lot of the times what happens is that there are a million tools out there to better our intimacy, to better our sex, to better our relationships, but people won't actively seek those out. Is they'll just because it's so much easier to just like get into a fight or to go cheat or to go do whatever besides sitting down and having a hard conversation because contracts can be rewritten because we're always growing and evolving as people. So if you get married, that contract that you had, like I need you to do this and you to do that, is not going to be the same in a year, in a few months, in maybe a few weeks because circumstances changes, we change as people. So like things are going to change in our relationship and it's okay to reevaluate the contract. And if someone isn't giving you something, like if you feel like your partner isn't having enough sex with you, instead of just like going out and cheating, it's sitting down with them and being like, hey, is there something wrong? Like, I feel like I'm not getting enough attention from you. And, is something going on that's affecting that? Is there something I can do? Like, it seems so simple too, to like just have a conversation. But people are so afraid of confrontation. They're so afraid of just having that basic conversation where it's just like, hey, what's going on? Like I need something. I need like this type of support and I don't feel like I'm getting it from you recently. What's going on?
Oh, and it's hearing you say that, like, it does sound so simple, but I know firsthand it's terrifying. It can be terrifying. And I'm like, is it, you know, a fear of the response? Is it like a fear of what the other person's going to say? Is it a fear of the rejection? Like, what is it that makes such a simple conversation so terrifying to the point that people would rather go out and abandon what they built, or, risk it, or whatever, which breaks my heart because I'm a CLG. I'm a certified lover girl. Like, I love love. I love old traditional, like all the things, like hopeless romantic. So it breaks my heart, like, to hear just some of the trends and things that you see in relationships now.
Yeah. And it's completely this like fear of rejection and vulnerability. Because on one
Yeah.
side, it's you having to express yourself in a way where you have to talk about yourself and say like these are my needs, like this is something I need.
Ugh.
I know, people are so uncomfortable for just like asking for what they want. And then on the other side, it's exactly like, what if you get rejected? Like, what if you're completely vulnerable and open up to someone and say, hey, I need this from our relationship, and they deny you and they reject you? That can be so earth shattering. And a lot of times it leads people into this like fight, flight, or freeze. And it's, I won't say easier, but like going out and cheating, it's having to not be vulnerable, to not get rejected. It's being accepted because someone is like welcoming you into their bed, and you don't see the immediate consequences. Like, you're not thinking about the consequences when you're going it into. You're thinking of, I have a need that needs to be met. But instead of being vulnerable and opening up to my partner, the one I love, about this need and maybe getting rejected, I can just go get my needs somewhere else and I won't be rejected and I don't have to be vulnerable and problem solved. But then it creates a whole nother problem.
And exactly what you said. I think it's because of like people dealing with issues of like self worth and fear of rejection, abandonment wounds from childhood. Like if you're, which so many people are on some level in some way, just because I think the way like our generation was reared and their generation before them and before them, that so many people are carrying like different degrees of some sort of like abandonment or rejection wound, that the idea they're going to internalize how their partner acts and perceives them, and to ask for something that you need means to risk them not being able to meet it, or saying or making you feel like you're not enough for them to try to. Or it may be that you just have learned that communicating your needs is not doesn't matter because they're, other people don't meet them and it's just not something that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I think that just speaks to like how important inner work on yourself is before even entering into relationships, which means having to be by yourself, which is not always something we want to hear.
Yeah. And also, like, I think our relationships also test us so much. Like, you can be the perfectly healed person on your own, but you will get into a relationship and it will like fucking tear you apart in the best ways. Because it does, it brings up so much uncomfortableness. It brings up so many old wounds that we weren't even expecting to come up, that it can really activate us and put us in these really intense states, which is also part of the reason why I love like coaching on relationships, is because even though there's so much work we can do around self-love and self-worth, it's going to feel different in a relationship. Like, you can feel on your own that like you are completely worthy, but when you get into a relationship, there'll be like one tiny little thing that'll start to make you feel unworthy. And then that'll kind of spiral. And then you'll be like, what am I doing? Am I actually worthy? What did I do getting into this relationship? I was so much worthier on my own. Does this dim my worth? Does this lift my worth up? It brings up so many uncomfortable questions that we have to answer, because we all want to feel love. We all want to feel worthy. We don't want to be abandoned. But so many of those old wounds will like come up and resurface in relationships or even on our own, and being able to move through those as well.
Do you find that in coaching, that do you typically recommend to people that both, like if they're, I'm sure you get people that are single that come to you, but people that are in a relationship, is it better if they're both seeking the tools, or like do you have situations where one person is and their partner isn't?
I think it's so essential that like both people, I love working with couples. I think it's fantastic because it's difficult for me as a coach when I'm just talking to one person in the relationship the whole time,
Yeah.
because then it's one-sided. I'm only hearing one person's side and then that's all I know. And yes, I can absolutely help that person, but it helps when it's in a couple also because then it means both people are committed to making this work. Because I have had clients who I'm just working with one side of the couple and the other one doesn't want to do it. And then it's not going well because one person is committed. They hired me, they're working on their intimacy, they're working on their sex beliefs. And then there's one person who's doing nothing to like actually improve and work on the relationship.
So I want to talk about the message I sent you about energy exchange. I'm just
Yeah.
really fascinated by energy. Everything is energy, and I just think that there's not. It's to me, it's not talked about enough. Like just our frequencies, our energies, the energy around us, taking in energy, and I had seen it was like a TikTok or something, and this lady was like, "I'm celibate. I'm not having sex." Because of the energy exchange in sex. And I was like, that's stupid. And I don't know. I came back to it a few times and like researched it a little bit and just in my own journey decided like, yeah, that's legit. Like that is not something to be take lightly. So what are your thoughts on an energetic exchange that takes place during sex?
So it's totally an energy exchange. There's like varying degrees, of course, to it because some people are more open and more people are blocked off. So some people can also take on a lot of that energy too if they're like highly empathetic or they're just more
Ooh.
open to it. So then it also just feels like it can push your energy to the back a little bit and then you're focused on that energy that came into you. And part of this is like
Literally.
orgasms. Yeah, literally. Part of this is orgasms because like, cum is such a life force. It is, especially for men, it is such a source of energy that releasing that can be very symbolic of like giving your energy to someone. And in that energy exchange, it is so much like vulnerability and intimacy, but it's also like taking that on too. And you can take on like hexes as well from other people. You can take on like curses that may have been on other people. But it's a complete energy exchange, like varying to the degrees that you let the other person in. And it can also really cloud your own judgment and your own ability to connect with yourself because you have other energies like still trapped into your body and they can stay for a very long time. Like it's not like an immediate energy exchange and then after a few days like it wears off. It's this huge energy exchange because sexual energy is so powerful. Like it's such a life force and like sex is also like how we bring children into the world. So it can be an incredible energy exchange and it can also like that energy that you create like you could take on the other person's energy and give your energy to the other person but also you can stay kind of stuck in that mutual energy that you both created and like sometimes especially at the beginning of new relationships this is that like high off love like it's this like kind of being drunk off each other's energy and you feel this kind of new energy into your world so it completely affects all of you.
What? That's interesting. What do you think the energy exchange ideally looks like in a committed partnership or marriage? Like, what does it then become?
It becomes very much a flow and like making sure like boundaries are in place and being able to be vulnerable without giving yourself all or taking everything from the other person as well. It becomes this more balancing act. And obviously, it's never going to be like perfectly balanced, but being able to find this ebb and flow of each other where you're not taking all their energy or giving all your energy to the other person.
Is it also like, I guess thinking about like tantric. So
Mm.
what is what is tantric?
So, tantric, I love this. So, tantric is like this, it's a meditation essentially. It's this like type of like sexual meditation. So it comes from Tantra, which is from Hinduism, which talks about spirituality. So Tantra is really fusing. sexuality with spiritualism. So it's really about, in a partnership, it's about, I mean, even with yourself too, it's about deepening your connection with your partner or with yourself. So it's slow. You're focusing on your breathing. Like it's really being intentional, even in classic tantric practices, you don't, um, beforehand, you don't consume like drugs or meat or alcohol. Like it's very slow and intentional. It really is like a meditation. I know you're
Cut
super
out.
interested in the Tantra.
Yeah, so I really didn't know, just being familiar with the word and knowing it was like an Eastern culture thing and not really knowing anything else about it. And I sent you where in my soul contract, one of the things in my birth chart, this girl's really good at reading charts, was a three energy. And she said three energy comes like can has a lot of sexual energy. And let me see what it says. She said sexual energy is creative energy, which I want to talk about that too. And she said three holds immense sexual energy. It can be manipulated and used for manifestation. Also, want to talk about that. But she said, don't take advantage of this ability if you choose to practice it. I wasn't sure what that meant. And then she just said that threes have the potential to achieve euphoric state that is one of the most potent energetic forces available in this plane through the use of sexual energy. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that so much. Like sexual energy is, I still say it's like the most powerful form of energy, like in the universe. Actually, Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich, he writes a whole chapter on how you can create wealth using your sexual energy and how like all the greats in history have been well sexed because an orgasm or like sexual energy, there is nothing comparative. Like, yes, we can try and compare it to drugs, but really there's nothing like your own sexual energy. It's completely natural and exactly who you are. And I think this is also like part of the reason why in religion we're kind of stifled out of it and told us it's wrong because they know how powerful it is. So they're trying
That
to like
makes
steer us away
sense.
from it, right?
Ah,
But so using like sexual energy for manifestation is really powerful and something you can like do like an actual thing to use your sexual energy is like visual, like we talk about visualizing to manifest. So if you use your visualization to like get off on your visualization and at like the point of when your visualization is perfect, being able to have an orgasm, that is like using your sexual energy to manifest. And because when you think about it, what are we visualizing? We're visualizing what we desire, what we want. So if you desire something, like you desire sex too, like you have sex or you like masturbate because you have desire. So if you just connect the two and instead of like getting off on like genitals, it's being able to like get off on your own vision because that is like the height of happiness, the height of joy that you're trying to achieve.
that's amazing. I love that explanation so much. Because she said like suggested practicing tantric and like gave some links or whatever, and I just hadn't looked at them. But that is fascinating because that's exactly what it was talking about, was how powerful of a manifesting energy that was, and I have never heard that connection made before.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not talked a lot about, but it is. It's so freaking powerful and something that like you can do with Tantra using your sensual energy, especially as someone who like, I mean, obviously doing it with a partner is more like controlled with the other person touching. So recreating it as like on your own is like the same thing. It's just these really slow, intentional touchings and like focusing on the sensation is if you have a visualization that you're trying to manifest, it's because in Tantra you become so sensitive to sensation, like everything is very heightened. because you're moving so slowly and using your breath, is then in tantra with yourself or with a partner, is it's having that visualization and having all the sensations. So being able to do a type of tantric practice like giving yourself a massage, but making it very slow and sensual and engaging all your sensations. Okay, what in my visualization, what does the air smell like? Lighting a candle that has that air. What am I touching? And being able to find something that feels like that and like touching it along all your skin. Okay, what do I like hear? What do I see? And being able to move slowly in that sensual energy first, building up that sensual energy, and then moving it into your visualization.
Wow. I'm processing this.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I mean, I feel like that ties a lot with what it said about creative energy too. So, how can you harness that same energy and potential for your creativity?
I think
What does that look
creativity, like it's a lot of like embodying, especially like using your sexual energy for creating, especially because I think especially in creating, a lot of us can feel like we're just kind of pounding the pavement that, you're working on something and working on something and you just start to not feel inspired. So what do? You get up and take a walk or you move your body in some way. So being able to use it for creativity, creative energy is just being able to move through it, being able to move with it. And because those visualizations will come, it's being able to really open yourself up to it. And a lot of people struggle with Tantra because they have all these intimacy blocks. But allowing yourself, especially doing it, and I always recommend before people like do Tantra with a partner, unless their partner's experience, is like being able to do it with themselves first so they can really understand how tantric practices feel in their body, because it's like a type of meditation, it's a type of yoga, it's a type of movement and embodiment. So in that creativity, you can even start moving in a way where you would physically create. So like if you're a painter, you can literally just take like a paintbrush. I have a paintbrush right here. But take like a paintbrush and like move sensually and slowly, just like with a paintbrush, and just opening yourself up to be able to receive that creativity. And instead of thinking logically and like this is a step by step process, and if I'm not doing these steps perfectly, then I'm not doing Tantra right, or I'm not using my sexual energy right. But allowing, really like allowing whatever needs to come. And that goes back to like energy exchange too, which is why it's so great to do tantric practices alone, because then it's just your own energy and you're just playing with your own energy.
I love that. I feel like it's really good for like self love too. I mean, it's to like slow down that process and really like experience yourself in that way. And that is another like common thing you'll hear said that I'd like to like debunk. And I think really you just did is like there are people, maybe probably more women than men, that will say, "Oh, I don't need like a vibrator. I don't need to like, do that on my own because I have a partner for that or I have a husband for that." So,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say to that as to why it's so important to connect sexually with your own body outside of sex with your partner?
I think it helps people explore what they want and what actually feels good, especially if you're in a long-term relationship. You can start to just get accustomed to sex the way it is, or what you guys are doing together, or because there's that energy exchange, and because there's like that fear of vulnerability and rejection, people don't explore with themselves what turns them on. And they're also afraid to have a conversation with their partner and say, hey, I want to try this. Because, ooh, what if you have a desire and like you share that with someone and they say, no, that's weird. Like it's soul crushing, especially when we talk about sexual desires. So exploring it with ourselves allows us to explore things we want to try, get comfortable with it, and then be able to talk to a partner about what we want to try. And because we all have past experiences and past hurt, sometimes in that energy exchange with a partner, we can be putting that onto them without even realizing. And in any partnership, yes, it's so good to have a good relationship with your partner, but you should also both have good relationships with yourselves. It shouldn't just be you both relying on each other. There's a great quote from Beth Dutton in Yellowstone, and she's talking to some woman, and the woman says, like, oh, I could never date a cowboy because they'll always love their horse more, they'll always love the job more, and I want to be everything. And Beth Dutton says, I want a man whose life is already full. That way we have something to share together. And I love that because it's so important to have a good relationship with ourselves because that impacts all our other relationships. But when you have only your partnership or only a relationship with someone else, then you're just, all your identity is that other person. You really have no identity. And you should have your own identity. You should have things that also light you up and be able to connect with your own body so you know what feels good, so you can just feel good in your own skin. And also, God forbid, what happens if that relationship ends and your
Which
partner leaves you?
that's codependency.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's complete codependency. So it's so good. And yeah, like you don't have to, like, some people in relationships love to masturbate, some people don't. And that's totally up to them and their relationship, but you should explore like what you want to do sexually and even just having simple practices like giving yourself a massage or like taking a bath or just, even like when you put on like lotion after the shower, things like that, like simple things that you can do to like get in touch with your own body and not just kind of conform to what sex is with a partner.
That's an interesting. I would have not even thought about the how codependency shows up when it comes to intimacy and sex. But I mean, like, there's codependent men and women. But just something as simple as like if you're codependent and you're also like a people pleaser, you're so consumed with, am I pleasing this other person? You're not really thinking about yourself and your own needs, and how is that a balanced sex life or a fulfilling sex life that just becomes about a transaction, or you trying to use sex or sexuality as a way to get your own needs met. So like a triggering, I know when I was like really young, like in my early 20s, like a triggering what do you want? I don't know. You know, I don't even know, you know. So like how many people much older than that even have maybe that have been in really long-term relationships for a long time have never sat and thought about that because they've never really experimented out on their own with what they do like. And I also think our culture plays a little bit into that too. And just even like what we were saying earlier about um, the messaging that women, especially women, get about sex. We aren't, I don't, in our culture. I mean, it's kind of, on one hand, some people tell you to use it as manipulation and use it as a power, which I think there's a lot of layers to that. And then it's also said to be something that you owe someone else. So where are you in that? You know?
I mean, I definitely think, absolutely it can be used for like power and manipulation. And, anyone who wants to do that, absolutely go for it. And I do think like it is like it can be used like freaking currency where people think like especially, beautiful women who like know they're gorgeous. They're like, "Oh, I know I can get anything I want because I'm beautiful." And, guys can be kind of like lapdogs and be like, I'll give her anything, like, because, like, she pleased me really well. And so it can definitely be like a type of manipulation, but then also the manipulation comes, like, women are taught that it can be used as manipulation because they've been taught that it's required of them. So they think, well, if it's required of me anyway, how can I use it in my favor to get what I want? Which can be hugely empowering to some women as well. And it can be a great, like, bringing power back to women, which is wonderful, but it also shouldn't be like, I will use sex to get what I want. Like, why do we have to use anything to get what we want? Like, why does it have to be this, like, either I owe it to someone or I give it to them and they owe me everything? Like, why does it have to be this either or?
Why has it become a bargaining chip in our society?
Hmm. I think it's
What
just,
do you,
no,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was just
Go ahead.
thinking about how you've traveled. You're so well traveled, like you've been so many different places, and just are there any major differences in like different? Just thinking about different cultures, is there anything that like sticks out to you about a difference between two cultures in the way they think about sex?
Yeah, I think it's really, and I mean, I think it's just fascinating, like how different cultures think about sex and how we teach sex as well, because it's also depending on like the individual inside those cultures. Like, for example, some women feel very empowered by wearing a full hijab, and they feel very empowered in their like sensual feminine selves, and that some women are like burning them in the street because they feel like it takes away from their femininity. So I think also like looking at other cultures, we can't exactly judge because like it's difficult to be like, oh well, that's wrong or right. And I feel like in Western countries, we're like we decide what is good and what is bad, but it's really like, we can always offer support to them because there are still women who like commit suicide because they're in arranged marriages. There are some women who have been in arranged marriages for 40, 50 years and are very happy or have never really been happy in their relationships. And I think we're seeing this great evolution too in sex where it's being more talked about in so many different countries around the world. And women are feeling more able to ask for their needs. And there's so much work still needing to be done. Like in the last few years, Kenya has just started to like move away from female genital mutilation. And there's countries like um, one of the Nordic countries, they start teaching sex education from a very young age. But it's not like they're not talking about like actual sex, but like they start in kindergarten with like consensual like touching, like high fives and hugs and like how to be a good friend, and like it moves up like that. So I think a huge part of it is just the education and the culture that people grow up in too, because like I've had talks with like, you know, Maori women who are just like, no, 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 like we do not talk about sex. And then I've also talked with like, little Indian grandmothers who were just like, oh, when I was a teenager, you should have seen me. And I'm like, okay, like, it's so crazy. But I think we are seeing this like huge revolution in people from all different countries starting to feel more comfortable talking about it. But that's what's so important is the education overall.
I love what you said about we had that conversation at dinner in Bali. I think I don't know if you remember or not about like consensual touch and like this culture of like telling little kids like, oh, you better go hug your family member XYZ. Like even if that family member is a great person, you're telling your kid you don't have control or autonomy over your own body. So if you don't feel like hugging someone, you're going to disappoint them, and that's not okay.
Yeah.
When that, and there are a lot of people, I've said that in a lot of spaces, just being in education and what have you. And there are people that have been really offended by that. And I'm like, it seems like such a basic concept to me. Like, no, you're teaching bodily autonomy and that not saying other people's need to hug you and is not over is more important than your need for distance. Like
Hmm.
that doesn't make sense to me.
And choice is like so important for kids. And especially if you think about those kids And I love that example. And honestly, keep bringing it up. Like, trigger the fuck out of people because it's such a good example. And like, yeah, like let them be triggered, let them be mad. Like, because it's so good to talk about. Because also when you think about those kids, like if you think about a child who is like told, "Oh, go hug your uncle because like you're gonna make him sad if you don't," and like forcing this kid to hug their uncle, but knowing it makes them feel uncomfortable, they're going to be the same person who grows up. And when someone tries to have sex with them that they don't want to have sex with, they're going to say yes and go through with it because they're afraid of saying no because they don't want to disappoint the person. It's like breeding people pleasers.
Yes. And I've heard even like this is interesting because it's making me think about um I don't even remember who the conversation was with, but we were talking about it was a friend of mine and he was talking about a friend of his, this was like years ago, who had gotten into this situation where someone like was aggressive with her sexually and like his response to it was like, why would you let them in your apartment, or like why would you like let that person in your apartment alone? And so it's almost like as women we've kind of grown up with like, you should have known better, that's a man, like why were you in the car with a man, why did you let that man in your house, why were you wearing that, why would you like
Mm,
give that impression? So there's a lot of just natural, I think, what we have been taught are just natural protective things that you just do to where it becomes too easy, in my opinion, for when you hear about situations, whether it's as someone being essayed or whatever the situation is, where it's like, why didn't she do this? Why didn't she check the, the driver's, what do you call it? The on the back of the car, in the Ubers. Why didn't she check the license plate
oh, the
on the
license
Uber? Why
plate.
didn't she do this? Or why didn't she do that? So the narrative just becomes very like blaming women.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm not looking at like all the factors too, and not like also teaching kids better because like if you look at that woman too and be like, why did that happen to her? You have to look
Yeah.
back at like exactly how she was brought up, what she was taught by her parents, by her friends, by her community, by her school, by her friends. Like there's so much that goes into that. And on the other side, it's like, what are we teaching our men as well? Like, how are they growing up thinking this is okay? Like, and that's the
And
thing.
that's the thing. That narrative also demonizes men and
Hmm.
unjustly. And it's like makes it sound like men are all predators. Just like that thing going around. It's like, would you rather be alone in the woods with a bear or a man? Like this is all sending this perpetuating this narrative that men are these dangerous predators who with these primal instincts, then they have no self-control. And I don't think that that's true. Like you said, it goes back to like, what are we where is this coming from as a stereotype, like what are we doing like in education and teaching men and women about consent and what that looks like, and bodily autonomy, but then also like what stereotypes are we still perpetuating?
Yeah. And I think there's like a huge stereotype. Like, the one I see the most often is just for men, like growing up, is just be a man. Like, men don't cry. Like, you need to step up and be the protector and the provider, and you're not allowed to be vulnerable. And being like feeling emotions is weak, and it's taught like this very outdated version of like what a man is, and it doesn't encompass all the layers of men. It just encompasses like provider, like this like tribal warrior and
It
nothing
sort
else.
of encourages them to be primal.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
sort of saying like be primal, and
Hmm.
then that's exactly what we're you know also on the other side saying, like that also comes with issues.
Yeah. And a lot of men, like, to give them their credit, is like a lot of men don't really know that they're doing harm in a lot of different situations when it comes to women because that's just like what they were taught. So they think it's just so on like one side we have men who we breed to be primal and just kind of take whatever they want because it's their right as a man, like feel nothing. And then we have women who are taught to be like people pleasers and to just accept whether you want it or not, and just to like be there to support the man. And then we're wondering why these situations happen, like SA. And it's
Yeah.
completely like, oh, well, look at the people that you're raising. Like, look at the type of women and men that you're generating in society.
What's being modeled and what like narratives are being passed down generationally. I think what you were saying about like different cultures and the very, whether it be like a like genital mutilation or just very sexually oppressed cultures, goes back to that what you said about the power of sexual energy, and especially in women, like in the idea that women are, which I've kind of just been reading about this recently, women are portals.
Mm-hmm.
um, what are your, what if you were to, so to say that statement to a lot of people is like, what? So how would you unpack that for someone that didn't know what that meant?
Well, women are portals. I mean, if you even think about like the vagina itself, like the word in Old English meant like a sheath for a sword. So it was like
I
women
love that.
were, right? Women were supposed to mean like, this place for men. But if you think about it, like women are the gateway to life in this world. Like we absolutely men contribute, but like women are the ones who like release children into the world. And a lot of societies in the past have been matriarchal versus patriarchal. So women were the ones who ran everything. They were the elders, they were the council members, they were the ones who made the important decisions.
The
Because
wise one.
exactly, yes, because they were the prophets. They were the ones who were the most connected to divinities because men were usually out there providing, like hunting and gathering and being able to build. Whereas women were the ones who, because especially with our cycles, is a lot of women were just seen like that was part of what then made them so connected to the divine because their like body changed with the moon. And a lot of ancient cultures had some, like, the moon was a deity. So it was easier for women to be able to connect with other, like with the moon. So with other deities. So they were like this portal to the other worlds.
That was that came up in my last episode about how they used to track periods that way with the cycles of the moon, because there's like, it has to do with your like your energy and your strength and your power, and it's all tied to those moon phases.
I mean, I still track my cycle with the moon. I still have a lot of friends who
Yeah.
track their cycle with the moon. And it's really interesting too because like a lot of women will start bleeding either on the new moon or the full moon. And so it's like, with the new moon it's kind of like banishing energy, and with the full moon it's kind of manifestation, receiving, incoming energy. So it's really interesting to see. And a lot of times too is part of the reason like why we bleed from the moons is because like women have that connection with the moon, because there's that type of like divinity with the moon as well. And because we know the moon affects us so much too because we are water, because it has such an effect on our emotions.
Explain that, because I've seen that. I've read that before, and I think that's a great thing to unpack. So, how does the like the moon's influence over us?
I think I don't know, like I think it's very controversial because on one side I completely agree with it, and the other side I'm like, I don't know so much, very skeptical. But I think it's just something that you can witness quite a lot, especially in people. You notice people's energy gets a lot more rampant around the full moon, and this has to do with like people being able to stay up a lot later during the moon, or like they can't sleep and insomnia, because when we go back to like biological, like from our tribal roots, is like that was the time when people would be outside the most because the moon allowed for people to be outside during the night. It would allow for great hunting. It would allow for being able to sow the crops, to be able to move much more. And the new moon was more of a time of rest because it was dark so often. So, I mean, the cycles of the moon, you can even kind of compare it to the cycles of the seasons and like how we feel in different seasons and how we move through different seasons. And even men like can move differently with the moons. It's not just the women, but of course, like we bleed with the moons. I don't know if that fully answers your question.
No, it does. I'm just so fascinated because I'm like I'm new to the cycle syncing with the moon phases, and I'm just really fascinated by it. So Morgan, I want to close out with a question to you. As a sex and intimacy coach, if you could tell people, and it could be one thing for men, one thing for women, or just universally something for both, if you could tell people something small to practice every day, if like they say, if someone listening to this were to think, oh, I want to like work on my relationship with sex and intimacy, what is something small somebody can start with doing?
I always love the mirror exercise, which is whenever you're in the bathroom, like after you take a shower or something like that, just stand in front of your mirror completely naked and just look at yourself and like look all over yourself, really take your time with it. And you're going to start like noticing your imperfections. You're going to say, oh, I don't like the way that that looks, or this looks, or I wish this was a bit tighter, or this didn't look so much like this. But really being able to find the things that you really love about yourself and focus on those. Like, I love the way my eyes look. Oh, I love this part about me. And really just feeling into what it feels like to just be fully naked, just with yourself, but like in full view of yourself, just looking all over yourself, because it makes you more comfortable with your body. And you get to just like start noticing things that you like about your body. And anytime something comes up, it's like, well, I don't like that. Just kind of putting it to the side and being like, well, I love this about my body. So it gives some appreciation, but it also just helps you be more comfortable. Like you see your genitals, you see like your breasts, like you see all of you naked and like not hiding yourself, not like crossing your arms, but just like being fully open and naked with yourself.
Wow. That's fascinating. I love that because that's not an easy thing for a lot of people. I'm not like, some people when they get ready, they're like get ready completely naked and they're just in the mirror. I like go put on a big t-shirt or a robe or something.
Mm.
So it's like, and I live by myself.
Yeah.
So like, why am I doing that? I love that. Morgan, how can people get in contact with you and learn more about your services?
So you can follow me on Instagram at Morgan MMKP.
Okay. And I'm gonna link that in like the clips for the episode too in my stories so that people can find you and the great work that you do. Thank you are have so much knowledge. You are such a great resource. This was really fascinating. Thank you so much for taking time to come on here and answer some questions.
Of course. I'm so honored to be here. I love you so much. And I'm just like, your podcast is amazing. You're such a great host. You asked amazing questions and like you were so tuned in and you have so much that you've been on your journey and experienced and gone through. And to have this platform to be able to help people is just incredible. And I seriously commend you on all the work that you are doing.
Thank you. Back at you, Queen.
Yeah.
All right, Morgan.